What if the story of our world is not as simple as we think? We are told that human history stretches back only a few thousand years. Yet scattered clues suggest something far stranger. Ruins that should not exist. Myths that repeat across cultures and landscapes that carry scars of immense destruction. Imagine if Earth has not been shaped by one continuous timeline but by countless beginnings and endings. Entire civilizations may have risen, reached heights we cannot imagine, and then disappeared without a trace, leaving us to start again. Tonight, we will explore the quiet possibility that Earth has been reset thousands of times. When we hear the word reset, we often think of something quick and simple like pressing a button on a machine. But when we imagine the Earth resetting, it becomes something much more complex. It is not a single moment but a slow, powerful process that unfolds across thousands of years. A reset in this sense does not only mean destruction but transformation. Old worlds end and new ones quietly begin. In human stories, this idea appears in many forms. Some cultures describe a great flood, others a fire from the sky, others a period of darkness where the sun itself disappears. At first these myths seem different, but when we look closer they all share the same structure. The world becomes unlivable, life is nearly wiped away. And then something new starts. It is as though people across the world remembered the same event but described it in their own words. If Earth has been reset, it would explain some of the puzzles that surround our understanding of the past. We look at our timeline of history, and it feels short, almost too short for the vast age of the planet. Civilization as we know it is said to be only 6,000 or 7,000 years old. Agriculture, writing, cities, and all the things we call progress are thought to have begun only recently in geological terms. Yet the Earth itself is over 4 billion years old, and humans in their modern form have existed for hundreds of thousands of years. What was happening during all that time? Were our ancestors really doing nothing? Living in the same way for unthinkable ages until suddenly, almost overnight, they began building temples, carving stones, and sailing across oceans. The reset theory suggests another possibility. Perhaps civilizations did rise before, perhaps they built things we cannot easily imagine. And perhaps they lived in ways that do not fit our assumptions about ancient life. But then something happened. The world changed. Ice returned, or seas rose, or a fire swept the land. Entire populations may have been lost, and the traces of their culture buried under soil, sand, or ocean. Over time, nature covered everything. Mountains shifted, rivers moved, and the evidence of a previous world became difficult to recognize. This may sound like science fiction, but when we look at the geological record, we find reminders of immense shifts. Species have vanished many times in what scientists call mass extinctions. Each extinction was followed by a slow rebuilding of life. If nature itself has been reset, why not humanity as well? The idea does not require us to believe in something impossible. It only asks us to consider that human history could be part of the same cycle that affects every other form of life on Earth. So when we talk about resets, we are not only imagining floods or comets. We are imagining the possibility that Earth itself moves in rhythms, cycles of destruction and renewal. We are imagining that our place in history may not be unique, but one of many layers with countless others hidden below us, waiting quietly in the deep time of the planet. When we search for traces of forgotten civilizations, we often expect clear signs, grand cities, tools, or writings carved in stone. But what if most evidence has already been erased? The Earth is not a museum that preserves everything exactly as it was. It is a restless surface constantly reshaping itself. Mountains rise and fall, rivers carve through valleys, forests grow and disappear, and oceans shift their boundaries. Over the span of just a few thousand years, an entire city can vanish beneath soil or sea. Over tens of thousands, almost nothing recognizable would remain. Even so, there are strange hints that do not fit comfortably in the official timeline of history. In places like Turkey, India, and South America, archaeologists have uncovered structures far older than anyone expected. Gerbili in Turkey is perhaps the most famous. It is a vast ceremonial site made of enormous carved stones, some weighing many tons, and it dates back at least 12,000 years. This is thousands of years before writing, agriculture, or permanent settlements were supposed to exist. According to the traditional view, people at that time were simple hunter-gatherers. Yet here we find them working together to move massive stones, to carve intricate symbols, and to build a structure that required knowledge, organization, and skill. Gerbili is not alone. Off the coast of Japan, beneath the waters of Yonani, there is a set of stone formations that look remarkably like terraces and steps. Some believe it is a natural formation, but others argue it shows signs of deliberate shaping. If it is man-made, it would mean people built complex stone structures more than 10,000 years ago, long before official history allows for such things. In India, there are submerged ruins near Dwarka, mentioned in ancient texts as a great city of the past. These ruins now rest under the sea, suggesting they were built before sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age. Across the world, from South America to the Mediterranean, there are scattered stories of cities lost beneath the waves. Mainstream history often treats these as legends, but the discoveries of actual submerged ruins force us to reconsider. These anomalies are important because they do not fit the neat linear story of civilization's rise. If we accept the possibility of resets, they suddenly make sense. A people may have developed skills and knowledge only to be erased by catastrophe. What remains is a broken fragment, a clue without context. Later, when humanity rises again, these fragments become mysterious outliers. We look at them and say, this should not be here. But perhaps it is only a remnant of the last cycle. It is easy to forget how fragile evidence can be. A modern city, if abandoned today, would decay quickly. Within a few hundred years, vegetation would cover concrete, metal would corrode, and wood would rot. After 1,000 years, most structures would collapse. After 10,000 years, it would be difficult to see much at all. Add another ice age, rising seas, or volcanic activity, and almost nothing would remain. If advanced civilizations once lived before us, we should not expect to find complete cities waiting intact. We should expect only fragments, puzzling ruins, scattered artifacts, or stories passed down as myth. These traces remind us that history may be far older and far less simple than we are told. They suggest that the story of humanity could be one of cycles, each new civilization rising on the hidden bones of the last. One of the most unsettling aspects of human history is how often things seem to simply disappear. We look at the archaeological record and find long stretches of silence followed suddenly by bursts of activity. Whole cultures appear fully formed, then vanish without a trace. This uneven pattern is difficult to explain if civilization has been a single continuous climb. But if resets are real, the pattern begins to look different. It becomes the rhythm of destruction and renewal. Consider the Mayan civilization. For centuries, they built grand cities with towering pyramids, observatories, and complex calendars. Then, almost suddenly, their society collapsed. The jungle reclaimed their cities and people scattered into smaller communities. To this day, historians debate why. Was it drought, war, or disease? Perhaps it was all of these combined. But the result is the same. A civilization that had reached impressive heights simply disappeared into the forest, leaving only ruins behind. On a much larger scale, we see something similar in prehistory. Anatomically modern humans are said to have existed for at least 200,000 years. Yet for most of that time, the record is strangely quiet. Stone tools remain simple and unchanged for tens of thousands of years. Then suddenly, around 40,000 years ago, there is a great leap forward. Cave paintings appear, sculpture emerges, and advanced hunting tools spread rapidly. Why did this happen so suddenly? If humanity had the same brain and body for hundreds of thousands of years, why wait so long? Some suggest that we did not wait. That there were earlier attempts at culture and civilization, but they were lost. If a reset occurred, wiping out most of humanity, it would leave only small groups of survivors. These groups would lose knowledge quickly. Complex skills like agriculture, architecture, or navigation cannot survive long without a supporting society. The survivors would return to a simpler way of life using stone tools and basic shelters. Only later, when stability returned, would they rebuild and begin again. To us, it would look as though civilization suddenly appeared, but in reality, it may have been rediscovered. There is also the mystery of entire species disappearing without clear cause. The Neanderthals, close relatives of modern humans, lived across Europe and Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. They were strong, intelligent, and even capable of creating art, yet they vanished, leaving only traces in our DNA. Why did they disappear so suddenly? Was it competition, disease, or a larger environmental collapse? Some researchers suggest they may have been caught in one of these resets, unable to survive the sudden changes that followed. What is striking is that disappearance is more common in history than survival. Civilizations collapse, species vanish, landscapes transform, and only fragments remain. If we look at Earth through this lens, it feels less like a steady climb toward progress and more like a fragile experiment, one that has been restarted many times. Each disappearance becomes part of a larger story, not of failure, but of cycles. Perhaps the reason the past feels incomplete is that it is. Perhaps we are looking only at the most recent attempt while countless others lie buried deeper, erased by time. When we turn from archaeology to geology, the idea of resets becomes even more compelling. The Earth itself carries scars of immense destruction written into its layers of rock and ice. Scientists have long studied these layers to understand the planet's past, and what they reveal is not a steady, gentle story, but one marked by violent interruptions. One of the clearest patterns is the cycle of ice ages. For millions of years, Earth's climate has swung back and forth between warm periods and long stretches of cold. During the cold periods, vast sheets of ice covered much of the northern hemisphere, burying landscapes under kilometers of frozen mass. When the ice retreated, sea levels rose dramatically, flooding coastlines and drowning any settlements that may have existed there. This cycle of freezing and melting has repeated many times, reshaping the planet each time it occurs. If civilizations had lived along ancient shorelines, much of their world would now be hidden beneath the sea. We also find evidence of sudden catastrophes. Around 12,800 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, something unusual happened. The climate, which had been warming, suddenly dropped back into freezing conditions for more than 1,000 years. This event is known as the Younger Dryers. Some researchers believe it was caused by a comet or asteroid impact which may have triggered massive fires, floods, and rapid climate change. If a civilization existed at that time, its destruction would have been almost certain. Survivors would have faced an environment turned hostile overnight. Even further back, we see signs of cataclysms on a global scale. Roughly 65 million years ago, a giant asteroid struck what is now Mexico, creating the Chicxulub crater. The impact sent debris into the atmosphere, blocked sunlight, and wiped out most of the species on Earth, including the dinosaurs. Life eventually returned, but in a new form. Mammals rose to dominance only after this reset. The lesson is clear. The Earth has been reset before, not just once, but many times. Volcanic eruptions have also played their part. Around 74,000 years ago, the Toba supervolcano in Indonesia erupted with such force that it covered much of the planet in ash. The eruption is believed to have caused a volcanic winter, reducing global temperatures and shrinking human populations to small, vulnerable groups. Genetic studies suggest that humanity may have passed through a severe bottleneck at this time, with only a few thousand individuals surviving. If this is true, then we are the descendants of a near-extinction event, a reset on a smaller but still profound scale. All of this shows that the Earth is not a stable stage upon which civilization calmly unfolds. It is a dynamic, often hostile environment, one that can change suddenly and without warning. Floods, impacts, eruptions, and ice have all shaped its surface again and again. If we imagine that civilizations existed in earlier ages, it is easy to see how they could have been erased. Their cities would be crushed by glaciers, drowned by seas, burned by fire, or buried under layers of ash. Only fragments might survive, scattered in places we struggle to interpret. The geological record teaches us that resets are not only possible, they are part of the natural history of the Earth. The question is not whether resets happen, but whether human civilization has been caught in their path more often than we realize. When we look at ancient myths from around the world, we find a curious pattern. Civilizations separated by oceans and thousands of years often tell strikingly similar stories of destruction. At first, these tales are treated as symbolic, as simple stories meant to teach moral lessons. But when we compare them closely, the similarities begin to suggest something more. They sound less like inventions, and more like memories passed down through generations of survivors. The most familiar example is the flood myth. In the Western world, many people know the story of Noah and the Ark, where the world is covered by water and only a few survive to begin again. But the story does not begin or end in the Bible. In Mesopotamia, long before the biblical account, there was the tale of Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In this story, the gods decide to flood the world, and one man is warned to build a great boat to save his family and animals. The similarities to Noah's story are clear, and the Mesopotamian version is much older, yet the flood story appears far beyond the Middle East. In India, ancient texts tell of Manu, warned of a great flood by a divine figure and instructed to build a boat. In Greece, the myth of Deucalion and Pyrrha describes a flood that covered the earth, with the two survivors repopulating the land. Among the Maya of Central America, there are stories of earlier ages destroyed by water. Even in the distant Pacific, Polynesian traditions tell of great floods that reshaped their islands. It is difficult to believe that so many separate cultures all invented the same kind of story by coincidence, and it is not only floods. In many traditions, fire plays the role of destruction. In some Native American stories, the world has ended multiple times, once by fire, once by ice, and once by flood. In Norse mythology, there is Ragnarok, where the world ends in flames only to be reborn in a green, fertile land. In Hindu cosmology, time is divided into great cycles called yugas, with each age ending in destruction and renewal. Sometimes the destroyer is water, sometimes fire, sometimes a great collapse, but the structure remains the same. The world is cleansed, nearly all is lost, and life begins again. What makes these myths compelling is that they echo the very cycles we see in geology. Floods did occur when the ice sheets melted and seas rose at the end of the last ice age. Fire from the sky has struck in the form of asteroids and comets. Volcanic eruptions have darkened the sky and ended lives on massive scales. These events are rare on the timescale of one human life, but they are inevitable on the timescale of the Earth. Myths may be the cultural memory of survivors, stories shaped into religion, legend and parable, but rooted in real experiences of catastrophe. When different cultures across the world all remember worlds destroyed and reborn, it suggests that resets are not only written in stone but also remembered in story. Perhaps myths are not merely imagination, but the faint voices of our ancestors trying to warn us of what has happened before and what may come again. When we step back and think about the official timeline of human history, it feels strangely compressed. According to mainstream understanding, the story of civilization begins only about 6,000 years ago, with the rise of the first cities in Mesopotamia. Before that, we are told, people lived in small groups as hunters and gatherers for tens of thousands of years, slowly learning to farm and eventually forming larger communities. But if anatomically, modern humans have existed for at least 200,000 years, why would all of civilization suddenly appear so late? What were people doing during all that earlier time? The possibility of lost ages offers one answer. Perhaps there were civilizations before the ones we know, but they did not survive to become part of the official record. If these civilizations were destroyed, their traces could be buried, eroded, or submerged, leaving us with little more than fragments and mysteries. Over such vast stretches of time, even stone buildings would crumble, metals would corrode, and organic materials would vanish completely. Only scattered anomalies might remain, things that do not fit comfortably in the accepted timeline. Some researchers point to ancient maps as one clue. The Piri-Reis map, drawn in the early 16th century, appears to show parts of Antarctica free of ice. This is puzzling because Antarctica has been covered in ice for thousands of years. If the map is accurate, it may have been copied from far older sources drawn by people who had knowledge of the world before the last ice age ended. This would imply that seafaring civilizations existed long before the official beginning of history. There are also the megalithic sites scattered across the world, places like Stonehenge in England, the giant stone heads of Easter Island, and the mysterious ruins of Pumapunku in Bolivia raise questions about who built them, how, and why. Some of these structures are aligned with astronomical events, suggesting a deep understanding of the skies. Others are made from stone so large that even modern machinery would struggle to move them. Mainstream history attributes these achievements to relatively simple societies. But if lost ages existed, these monuments may be surviving evidence of their knowledge. Another clue lies in myths that describe earlier worlds. In Mesoamerican traditions, the gods are said to have created several previous ages of humanity, each destroyed in turn. The Aztecs believed they were living in the fifth age, following 4 cycles of creation and destruction. Similarly, Hindu cosmology describes repeating cycles of time stretching back into the distant past. These stories may reflect cultural memories of real resets encoded into myth to preserve them. If lost ages did exist, it would explain why history feels incomplete. We are not looking at a single unbroken story, but at the latest chapter in a much longer series. Each cycle leaves behind only traces scattered and faint like pages torn from a book. What we call the beginning may simply be the most recent attempt, with countless others buried deeper in time. The idea of lost ages challenges us to see humanity not as a straight line but as a repeating pattern. Civilizations rise, they fall, and then new ones emerge, often forgetting the ones that came before. If Earth has been reset thousands of times, we may be only the latest expression of a story that has played out again and again, far beyond the reach of written history. When we look back into the deep past, the silence is striking. Human beings like us have existed for hundreds of thousands of years, yet for most of that time we see almost nothing. No writing, no monuments, no lasting traces of culture. Archaeologists find tools and bones, but the story feels incomplete, as though pages are missing from the book of our past. This silence raises an important question. Is it really an absence, or is it a loss? If we imagine humanity living for 200,000 years, it seems unlikely that people spent all that time in the same way. Our species is inventive by nature. Even in small groups, humans develop knowledge, pass down skills, and adapt to their surroundings. In the span of just a few thousand years, we went from stone tools to space travel. Why then should we believe that in the tens of thousands of years before recorded history, nothing significant ever happened? The silence may not mean nothing occurred. It may mean that what did occur has been erased. Natural forces are good at erasing. Wooden structures rot quickly. Textiles and paper decay within centuries. Even metal tools corrode until they are unrecognizable. Unless something is buried and preserved under rare conditions, it does not last. Over the span of tens of thousands of years, almost all human creations would vanish. Add to this the effects of rising seas, shifting rivers, volcanic eruptions, and glaciers, and entire worlds could be wiped away. From this perspective, the silence of the past is not mysterious. It is expected. And yet every so often a fragment breaks through the silence. A cave painting thousands of years older than expected. A tool that seems too advanced for its time. A structure buried deep beneath layers of earth. These fragments are usually treated as anomalies. Exceptions to the rule, but taken together, they may be more than that. They may be faint echoes of forgotten ages. This silence also explains why myths became such an important way of preserving memory. If material culture disappears, stories can survive in the minds of survivors. They can be told and retold, reshaped over generations, carrying fragments of truth long after the physical evidence has vanished. This may be why so many ancient cultures speak of floods, fires, and destruction. They are not describing abstract ideas but memories of real events experienced by their ancestors. What is unsettling is how much of our sense of history depends on this silence. We assume that because we see no evidence, nothing existed, but absence is not the same as proof. The silence could hide entire civilizations, entire cycles of humanity erased, not because they never were, but because time is a powerful destroyer. If Earth has indeed been reset many times, then this silence is not an empty space, but a kind of veil. Behind it, countless stories may have unfolded, each with their own cultures, inventions, and struggles. We may never know their details, but the possibility that they once existed lingers in the gaps, reminding us that what we call history is only the surface of something much deeper. One of the most curious aspects of our past is the way human progress seems to happen in sudden leaps rather than steady steps. For long periods of time, people appear to live in similar ways, using the same tools and techniques with little change. Then, almost without warning, culture takes a dramatic leap forward. These jumps are difficult to explain if we imagine history as one continuous unbroken climb. But they begin to make sense if resets are part of the story. Take the example of human evolution itself. Modern humans are said to have existed for about 200,000 years. For most of that time, the tools we find are simple stone flakes and hand axes. Not much different from what earlier human species used. Then around 40,000 years ago, something changes. Suddenly, we see sophisticated cave art in places like France and Spain. We see carved figurines, musical instruments, and advanced hunting tools. This period is often called the creative explosion, a sudden flowering of culture and innovation. Why did it happen then and not earlier? Some scientists suggest that a genetic change triggered this leap. Others point to the growth of language or symbolic thought. But another possibility is that we are seeing the traces of recovery after a reset. Perhaps earlier cultures existed, developed knowledge, and then were destroyed. Survivors would have lived in simpler ways, focusing only on survival. Over time, as conditions improved, they began to rebuild, rediscovering skills and creating anew. To us, it looks like a sudden explosion of creativity. In reality, it may have been a reawakening. We see similar leaps later in history. Agriculture appears around 10,000 years ago in multiple places across the world. People in the Middle East, China, the Americas, and Africa all developed farming at roughly the same time, though in different ways. Why would this happen so suddenly and in so many places at once? It is possible that the environmental stability following the last ice age encouraged farming. But some researchers wonder whether fragments of older knowledge were passed down and rediscovered, helping humanity shift rapidly into a new way of life. The rise of cities is another leap. Within just a few thousand years of farming, we see the sudden appearance of complex societies in Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China. These civilizations seem to emerge fully formed with writing, architecture, astronomy, and laws. Archaeology rarely shows a long, gradual buildup. Instead, complex culture appears suddenly as if a switch had been flipped. If resets are real, this pattern fits. Each time humanity rebuilds, it may do so quickly, remembering fragments of what came before. These gaps and leaps are reminders that progress is not always steady. Human culture may not be a straight line, but a series of attempts interrupted again and again by catastrophe. Each time we rise from the fragments left behind, sometimes carrying memory and myths or oral traditions, sometimes rediscovering skills we thought were new. When we look at history this way, the sudden leaps no longer seem so mysterious. They are not accidents or miracles. They may be the rhythm of humanity, caught in the cycle of resets, rebuilding again and again on the ruins of forgotten ages. Among the many puzzles of the past, ancient maps stand out as particularly difficult to explain. Maps are practical tools, and they require knowledge of coastlines, distances, and navigation that is not easy to acquire. According to our timeline, accurate map-making is only a few thousand years old, yet scattered examples suggest that someone long before our accepted history may have had a far more advanced understanding of the world than we assume. The most famous of these is the Piri Reis map, created in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral of the same name. What makes this map unusual is not that it existed in the 16th century, but what it appears to show. In addition to the familiar outlines of Europe, Africa, and South America, it includes a southern land mass that looks strikingly like Antarctica. Even more puzzling, the coastline shown is not covered in ice but ice-free, as it would have been thousands of years ago. Official history tells us that Antarctica was not even discovered until the early 19th century, so how could a map from 1513 include its outline, let alone without ice? One explanation is that Piri Reis did not create this information himself. He wrote that his map was compiled from many older sources, some of which may have been ancient. If that is true, then the knowledge of Antarctica and other coastlines may have come from civilizations long before the rise of Greece, Rome, or even Mesopotamia. If such civilizations existed, they must have been capable of seafaring and global exploration. The Piri Reis map is not alone. The Orance-Fine map of 1531 also depicts Antarctica again with ice-free coastlines. The Bouquet map of 1737 shows rivers and mountain ranges beneath Antarctica's ice sheet, features that modern science only confirmed in the 20th century using advanced radar. If these maps were copied from older ones, it suggests someone had surveyed Antarctica long before written history acknowledges the possibility. Other anomalies appear in maps of South America where rivers and mountain ranges are drawn with surprising accuracy. These details would have been nearly impossible to know without either advanced exploration or inherited knowledge. Some argue that the accuracy of these maps can be explained as mistakes or guesswork. But when the same patterns appear across multiple examples, the coincidence becomes harder to accept. If we connect these maps to the idea of resets, a possibility emerges. Perhaps before the last ice age ended, a civilization existed with knowledge of navigation and mapping. They may have explored coastlines and recorded their findings. When catastrophe struck and the world was reset, their civilization disappeared, but fragments of their knowledge survived. Over thousands of years, these fragments were copied, traded, and eventually found their way into the hands of later mapmakers who preserved them without fully understanding what they showed. The existence of such maps does not prove lost civilizations, but it raises difficult questions. How could people know what lay beneath Antarctica's ice long before modern technology? Why do maps show coastlines that should not have been visible for tens of thousands of years? These puzzles suggest that our story may not be complete, and that earlier ages may have possessed knowledge now forgotten. Ancient maps may be among the clearest whispers of lost worlds, faint records of a humanity that explored farther and knew more than we imagined possible for their time. If there is one place where evidence of lost civilizations might be hiding in plain sight, it is beneath the sea. At the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose more than 100 m as glaciers melted. Entire coastlines were swallowed, and with them, whatever people had built along the shore. Today, nearly all of humanity's great cities are coastal. If ancient civilizations followed the same pattern, then many of their settlements would now lie underwater, hidden from us. In recent decades, divers and underwater archaeologists have discovered sites that seem to confirm this possibility. One of the most striking is near Yonauni, off the coast of Japan. Here beneath the waves lies a massive stone structure that resembles steps, terraces and platforms. Some argue it is a natural formation shaped by erosion, but others insist that the sharp angles, flat surfaces and organized layout suggest human construction. If Yonauni is indeed man-made, it would date back at least 10,000 years, a time when the land was above sea level. That would make it far older than any known city. Similar mysteries exist elsewhere. In the Gulf of Camby off the coast of India, sonar scans have revealed what appear to be the remains of large urban settlements now submerged. Divers have recovered artifacts such as pottery and tools that suggest great antiquity. Some estimates place these ruins at 9,000 years old or more, which would push the